Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will offer an update on the case of Lucy Letby. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Lucy Letby was born on January 4, 1990 in England. She was an only child. She attended the University of Chester to study nursing and worked as a student nurse. In 2011, Lucy graduated with a bachelor's degree in nursing and started working at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She was assigned to the neonatal unit. Lucy had wanted to be a nurse all her life. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. In June 2015, there were 3 unexplained deaths on the neonatal unit where Lucy worked. Another baby had rapidly deteriorated but ultimately survived. These incidents were out of the ordinary and caused alarm among the workers. Consultants were brought in to conduct medical reviews and noticed that Lucy was on shift during the mysterious incidents, but there was no direct evidence she caused them. In March 2016, Lucy was moved to day shifts where she could receive more support. In June 2016, there were 2 more deaths. Lucy had cared for both babies. Unable to figure out what was going on, the hospital made a decision in July 2016 to no longer accept premature infants born before 32 weeks. Lucy was advised that the consultants suspected her involvement in the deaths, and she was transferred into a non-clinical role. In September 2016, she filed a grievance. Another review was carried out in November 2016, but this one also failed to identify the cause of the excess mortality. In January 2017, reviews concluded that Lucy had not engaged in any wrongdoing. The consultants were forced to apologize to her. She was allowed to return to work on the unit. She was scheduled to return in May 2017, but she never did. In March 2017, the consultants advised the hospital it was time to notify the police. They believed the hospital was trying to cover up their concerns about Lucy. It didn't matter if they were forced to apologize or not. They believed she was guilty. The police were contacted in April, and they launched an investigation called Operation Hummingbird in May. 2 additional unexplained deaths, one from August 2015 and one from October 2015, were identified. Investigators also identified several other instances of alleged attempted murder. It was not clear how the victims were killed, but a few different mechanisms of death were theorized. For example, air embolism caused by injecting air into intravenous lines, air being forced down a nasogastric tube, insulin poisoning, overfeeding with milk, and physical trauma, like being attacked with medical instruments. Investigators came to believe that Lucy had used multiple methods to kill and attempt to kill several victims. She was arrested in 2018 and released on bail. In 2019, she was arrested for a second time and once again released on bail. On November 11, 2020, Lucy was arrested for a third and final time. This time she was charged with 7 counts of murder and 15 counts of attempted murder. All the alleged offenses occurred between June 2015 and June 2016. Lucy's trial started on October 10, 2022. The Crown argued that Lucy was a cold-blooded killer who managed to perpetrate her crimes without leaving any witnesses. Lucy's defense argued that many factors contributed to the deaths and deteriorations. They claimed that several physicians engaged in a conspiracy against Lucy. The jury had to consider a lot of information during the course of a very complicated trial. For example, 300 witnesses testified, there were 32,000 pages of exhibits, and the jury was provided with a 25-page glossary of medical terms. The jury started deliberating on July 10, 2023, and started returning verdicts on August 8. When the final verdict was reached on August 18, all the verdicts were made available to the public. Lucy Letby was found guilty on 7 counts of murder. Her victims were 5 premature boys and 2 newborn girls. She was also found guilty of 7 counts of attempted murder, which involved 6 victims. Lucy was found not guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder. The jury could not reach a verdict on 6 counts of attempted murder, which involved 5 alleged victims. On August 21, 2023, Lucy Letby was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order on each count. She can never be released from prison. She is only the 4th woman in the history of the UK to receive such a sentence. In June 2024, Lucy was retried for one of the attempted murder charges. On July 2, she was found guilty. 3 days later, she received another whole life order. Now moving to my analysis. This case has been shrouded in mystery because the court system in the UK has kept a lot of information secret. Based on what was initially released, it seemed pretty clear that Lucy was guilty. She was the only employee who was present during every single incident. This only left a few possibilities. Lucy was the killer, more than one nurse was involved, or every single death was the result of an unexplained medical cause and did not involve homicide. It seems very unlikely that more than one nurse was involved, and the chances of unexplained medical causes being responsible for every death is unlikely. The only remaining possibility is that Lucy was the killer. The problem with this theory is that information has been released which supports the idea that the neonatal unit was not a well-run or safe place. Maybe there was no killer at all. The mortality on the unit may have been high, but that doesn't mean homicide was involved. Is it possible that the criminal justice system misled the public into thinking this was an easy guilty verdict? Maybe Lucy's defense was correct, and she was the victim of a conspiracy. This brings me to the question, with the information available now, was Lucy Letby guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that she was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. When Lucy was in training to be a nurse, a nursing evaluator said that she was not good at picking up on nonverbal cues of anxiety from parents. This is consistent with Lucy being cold and callous. Lucy Letby was on duty in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital during a number of unusual deaths and deteriorations. She was the one common denominator, the only single person who could have been responsible for every death. After Lucy was arrested for the first time, the police searched her house and found a very suspicious note. Among other things, the note included these statements: "I'll never have children or marry. I'll never know what it's like to have a family. Why me? There are no words. I am an awful person. I pay every day for that. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them. I am a horrible, evil person, and I am evil. I did this." Under her bed, investigators found hospital notes that Lucy had removed from work in violation of policy. Some of them were related to her alleged victims. Furthermore, she searched the internet for the names of some of her alleged victims and their family members. The excess mortality was significantly elevated when Lucy was on the neonatal unit. When Lucy was removed from the unit in July 2016, the safety record improved dramatically. Since that time, the unit has cared for over 2,500 babies and recorded only one fatality. They were caring for infants who were at less of a risk of death, but this is still a significant difference. Now moving to the exculpatory factors. No witnesses saw Lucy harming any victims. There was no direct evidence that she killed or attempted to kill anyone. All the children who died were premature except for one. 3 of them weighed less than 3 pounds. Excess mortality was not limited only to that unit. The maternity ward also had a similar problem. The neonatal unit had a number of problems with staff, teamwork, culture, leadership, and competency. It was described as chaotic and a madhouse. A report was leaked indicating that during the time of the alleged murders, the unit where Lucy worked experienced an outbreak of a dangerous bacteria. Many people describe Lucy using positive terms. For example, she was hardworking, knowledgeable, conscientious, professional, confident, kind, gentle, soft, joyful, and peaceful. Lucy indicated that her disturbing words on the note did not represent a confession of murder. Rather, she didn't feel good enough to do her job. Some of her messages were recorded at the direction of a counselor and were intended to be therapeutic. The mechanisms of death provided by the Crown have been challenged by experts. For example, the air embolism theory is not supported by any evidence. The idea that air could be forced down a nasogastric tube has been called implausible and ridiculous, and the insulin poisoning theory involved testing that was not accurate. In February 2025, a panel of 14 medical experts determined that all the deaths and deteriorations could be explained by natural causes or substandard care. They did not find any evidence supporting deliberate harm. The last exculpatory item I want to cover is related to a phenomenon called the prosecutor's fallacy, which may have had an impact in this case. This fallacy leads to a misinterpretation of statistical data. The prosecutor's fallacy is when a prosecutor claims that the probability of the evidence given innocence is equal to the probability of innocence given evidence. Here's what this means. When trying to determine the probability that something caused an event, all the possible causes and their corresponding probabilities need to be considered together. In the case of Lucy Letby, we can't look at just the probability of murder and nothing else. We also have to look at the probability of unexplained fatal medical conditions. Those are the two possibilities considering that death already happened. One of those explanations must be valid. Those relative probabilities must be compared to one another. Both probabilities must be in the equation. Moving away from this specific case, I'll use another example which illustrates the prosecutor's fallacy. Let's say that you're an investigator assigned to solve a murder that occurred in a factory that manufactures components for chemical plants. A factory security guard found that one of the employees had been beaten to death from behind with an 18-inch pipe wrench as he was operating a hydraulic press. This is the only length pipe wrench used in the facility. On the victim's body, there was grease which was definitely transferred from a pipe wrench. This, of course, would not necessarily be true, but for the sake of this example, I will pretend it's true. The grease must have come from a pipe wrench. Furthermore, let's assume that nobody ever loans a pipe wrench to anyone else in this facility. If an employee has a pipe wrench, then only they will use it. If an employee does not have a pipe wrench, then they will never use one. There are 100 potential suspects in the factory, but only 20 of them have access to a pipe wrench. Only 10 of those pipe wrenches have grease on them. Fellow investigators detain a suspect who had a greasy pipe wrench, believing he must have been guilty. The prosecutor's fallacy would argue that the probability of the evidence given innocence is 10% for this suspect. This is a true assertion. The employee is one of 10 people who has a greasy pipe wrench. Here is where we get into the fallacy. They go on to say that the probability that this suspect is innocent, given the evidence, is also 10%, meaning there's a 90% chance he's guilty. This, of course, is not true because we know there are 9 other people who have a greasy pipe wrench. Again, the probability of the evidence given innocence is not the same as the probability of innocence given evidence. There is a massive distinction between those two probabilities. Only the second probability, the probability that someone is innocent, is relevant to court cases. By the way, just to remove any mystery, the security guard did it. The hydraulic press operator kept insulting him by calling him a flashlight cop. Now moving back to Lucy's case. The probability of all those deaths occurring while Lucy was on shift is low, but the probability that Lucy would be a killer is also low. These are the two probabilities which must be compared to determine which cause is more likely. If there was only a 1 in 1,000 chance that all the deaths would have occurred due to unexplained medical conditions, that doesn't look too good for Lucy. However, what if the chances of her being a serial killer was 1 in 5,000? When comparing the probabilities, it's 5 times more likely the unexplained medical conditions were responsible. It's worth noting that the actual probability of a nurse being a serial killer is lower than 1 in 100,000. With all this in mind, one might expect me to come to the conclusion that Lucy is not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. My opinion is actually the opposite. I believe that Lucy Letby is guilty of murder, and here's why. Just looking at the homicides alone, not even counting the attempted murders, the probability that all 7 deaths occurred randomly while Lucy was on shift is probably somewhere between 1 in 10 million and 1 in 2 trillion. Even though it's unlikely that Lucy is a serial killer, the chances are still greater than the alternative. When the attempted murders are factored in, it only gets worse for Lucy. Even though I believe Lucy is guilty, I think that statistical experts should take a closer look at this case to determine the actual probabilities of each murder and attempted murder. As far as I know, that is something which has never been done, or at least those data have never been released to the public. Lucy deserves to have a defense based on accurate statistical calculations. Maybe her guilt will be affirmed, but maybe not. Lucy's key to freedom could be hidden away in the numbers. Those are my thoughts on the case of Lucy Letby. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. A lot of people have strong feelings about the guilt or innocence of Lucy Letby. I think the way a person feels about this case is really highly dependent on what evidence they believe is important. If a person looks at the statistical data and they put a lot of weight on that, then Lucy looks guilty. If they put a lot of weight on the potential incompetence of other members of the hospital staff, then Lucy looks innocent. It's all about what area gets that weight. What is important to an individual looking at this case? Now, this case is massive and complicated. So you have all these different experts that focus on one different area. And depending on what that area is, this affects how they feel about guilt or innocence. So there is no real consensus. There are a lot of different opinions. Again, people have strong feelings in both directions. Some people are absolutely certain she's guilty, and other people are saying things like there's no evidence that a murder took place, not even one murder, much less 7 murders. I think sometimes a case just gets so bulky and so complex that it becomes difficult to ever find a consensus. If somebody wants to believe that she's guilty, again, I think the statistical evidence is a place that they can really look at for some comfort or some reassurance. If they want to believe she's not guilty, then the focus would be on a potential conspiracy and incompetent staff at the hospital, if there were incompetent staff there. So one could really look at those hospital conditions and say, well, they were not ideal. There are also various ways to interpret Lucy's writings. Some people look at her statement like, I am evil, and they think, well, that's it. This was a confession. Other people see a confused and distraught worker who is facing these unexplained deaths and not feeling very competent. This is why she wrote these messages. She was questioning her own competency, her own value as a nurse. So again, a lot of components. A person can look at any of these, some of these, maybe just one of these, and come up with wildly different conclusions than other people. One thing is for certain, this was not a simple case. There are no easy answers when looking at the case of Lucy Letby.